Ladies and gentlemen, we are being recorded. It's going to take a moment here. We're going to share it on our various social media platforms. So give us a moment. Good evening, Erica. Good evening, Mick. Good evening, Chagai and Margot. Good evening, Ruth. Hold on. Who do we got? Good evening, Philip and Michelle. Good evening, James. And let me just get this going here. We're going to share this on a few more places. Something went wrong. Ich weiß nicht what went wrong. 1 second. Okay, there we go. We're going to share. We're almost there. Good evening, John. Good evening, Kayla Gittel. What a crowd tonight. Look at that. You see what happens? Absence makes the heart grow fonder. You leave for a couple of weeks and everyone comes running back like Bubalach. Actually, maybe I should do this more often. I'm going to get the wrong message. Let me just grab the chumash here and we're going to get started. Buckle up. Here we go. Okay. We are in Parshas Vayechi. We are in the last portion of the book of Genesis, believe it or not. I hope you had a wonderful Hanukkah. For those that celebrate New Year's on the Gregorian calendar, I hope it was meaningful, whatever that means. Right? Someone sent out a meme last week. It said, we have a New Year's and we sit in shul for 2 days. They have a New Year's and they sit up till 12 o'clock at night drinking alcohol. It's a very different New Year's. But we are in Parshas Vayechi, and I want to get straight into it because what we're going to discuss tonight really will give us insight into motherly love and fatherly emotions. So I think people are used to the terms of motherly love is something that we're used to. Mothers, if they're normal, if they're sane, if they're working as mothers should, they're incredibly loving. To the point that many times us fathers look at our spouses, the mothers of our children, and we wonder what they're smoking. Like, why are you so devoted to these kids? All they do is make you miserable. But mothers are incredible like that. But the part that we don't speak about enough, and we don't have a lot of insight into, is fatherly emotions. The macho image of what fathers are supposed to look like really is not healthy because it's not true. And today we're going to tackle both. We're going to get incredible insight into motherly love, but also incredible insight into fatherly emotions and the sensitivity of a father for their son when seemingly they can't even be blamed for the issue, but they take full responsibility and show up in ways that are very, very impressive. And so we are in the Life Chumash, and we're going to begin in chapter 48, verse 7. So we're in the end of the life of Jacob, right? So our patriarch Jacob, he's now gathering his grandchildren and his children before he passes away. For those that don't keep track, Jacob lived till 147 years old, which back then was considered fairly young. His father Isaac lived till 180. His grandfather Abraham lived till 175. He was a big chunk of his life was made shorter because certain things that he did, which is beyond the scope of today's class. It was maybe a class that would have been nice last week when we spoke when his age is an issue. But here we find Jacob at the end of his life. He's interacting with his family, and he asks Joseph to make sure that he gets buried in the land of Israel. So he says to his son, if I find favor in your eyes, right? Because he's talking to his son who's the viceroy, he runs the country. He's the well-connected guy who's running the whole Egyptian empire. So he says to him, if I find favor in your eyes, please take a vow, an oath, and do the kindness for me and don't bury me in Egypt. Let me lie with my fathers, right? Which is Abraham and Isaac, his father and grandfather. You'll carry me out of Egypt. You should bury me in their burial place, which is in Hebron, in the city of Hebron, where the patriarchs and matriarchs, aside from Rachel, aside from Rachel, are buried. And what does Joseph say? I will do as you tell me. So Jacob says to his son, swear to me. It wasn't enough that he pledged it, he said, swear to me. So he swore. And Jacob expressed himself with a lot of gratitude to Joseph for agreeing to bury him in Israel. Fast forward a few verses, and Jacob says something very, very profound to his son Joseph. He says in verse 7, I know that when I was coming from Padan, which is when Jacob was coming from the house of his uncle Laban, where he spent over 2 decades working in order to marry Leah and Rachel and Bilhah and Zilpah. So when I was coming from Laban's house back to Israel, Mesa alai Rachel, Rachel died on me. That's the words he says. Rachel died on me. Be'eretz Canaan, in the land of Canaan, Baderech, on the road, Be'oid Kivras Eretz Lova Ephrasa, when there was still a stretch of land to reach Ephrat. Ve'ekberesham Baderech, I buried her on the road. He Beis Lachem, that is the city or the town of Bethlehem. So out of the blue, Jacob tells Joseph, which by the way, Joseph was there when Jacob buried his mother Rachel. Joseph was an 8-year-old kid. So he was there when his mother was buried at the side of the road in Bethlehem instead of being taken to the cave of the matriarchs and patriarchs in Hebron. But here, 32 years after Rachel's passing, 22 years after Jacob hasn't seen his son Joseph, and now they're finally reunited, and now, after 17 years of living in Egypt, Jacob is going to pass away. He decides to say to his son that when your mother died on the road, she died on me, and I buried her on the road. What's the context? Now, if you were to study, let's say you skipped Rashi for a minute. You didn't take the basic interpretation of the verse. You didn't take Rashi. You went to, let's say, Nachmanides, Ramban, another primary commentator of the Torah. Ramban says that she died on the road suddenly, and I couldn't bury her in the cave of Machpelah, because how could I leave the kids and the flock and everything on the side of the road? I couldn't make the way to Hebron. I had no choice. So I apologize now that I'm asking you to bury you in Israel. I'm asking you to bury me in Israel, even though I didn't bury your mother in Hebron. I want you to know that I buried her on the side of the road because I had no choice. I had to take care of the flock and the children. That's what the Nachmanides, Ramban says. The Sforno, the Italian commentator, the Sforno says that I was in such a state of deep mourning for losing my beloved Rachel, my beloved Rachel, your mother, my beloved first love, which was Rachel, that I couldn't even put myself together to schlep to Hebron. I was just not in a stable place emotionally after losing my beloved Rachel. I couldn't do that. Rashi doesn't take either of those approaches, and Rashi quotes a medrash that's sort of out there. And if you've heard me quote this medrash, that's okay. That means you haven't lost your memory, because I do love this Rashi and I love this medrash. And I've addressed this over the years. It's all from a Farbrengen of the Rebbe from Parshas Vayechi 19 Tavshim Mem Vav, which was either the end of 1985 or the beginning of 19. It was the winter of either late 85, December of 85 or January of 1986. I didn't check on the calendar, but it was the year 5746. We're now in the year 5783. This was in the year 5746. Rashi quotes the Medrash, and you gotta love this Medrash because it's so packed and so loaded. Rashi says that what Jacob was telling Joseph is as follows: that when I was coming from Padan, from my uncle Laban's house, the afal pish ani matriach alech, and even though I'm burdening you, lo helicheni likavar to schlep me and bury me in the land of Israel, I didn't do the same effort for your mother, right? For Rachel, because she died on the side of the road near Bethlehem. I buried her there on the side of the road. Listen to this one. I didn't even take her body from the side of the road near Bethlehem into the city of Bethlehem. I buried her on the side of the road right there. So your mind must be exploding, Jacob tells Joseph, that I'm asking you to schlep my body from Egypt to Israel. I couldn't even take your mother 5 feet into the city of Bethlehem. I know that in your heart you're carrying feelings about that against me. I want you to know, my dear son, before I pass away, that I buried her according to the will of God. I wasn't lazy. I didn't have excuses. I didn't say, oh, it's too much. I'm emotionally not stable enough to schlep to Hebron. Or I was too busy with the kids in the flock. I couldn't. No. It was a divine request that I bury her there. Why? That when Nevuzradim was the general, the butcher, who murdered tens of thousands, the butcher of Nebuchadnezzar. Yesterday was the 10th of Tevis. And for those of you that watch my daily clip, it was a short clip with this idea, but we're going to go into depth over here. That when Nevuzradim the butcher was exiling the Jews from Israel to Babylon, they would have to walk from Israel to Babylon. You walk right by the road near Bethlehem. So as they're walking by the road, Yotzes Rachel al Kivra, Rachel goes out of her grave. She goes out of her grave metaphorically. She comes out of her grave. Uboicha, she cries. She begs for mercy for their children. She turns to God and says, look, my children are going to exile. Help them. As it says, Koil b'Rama Nishma, as the prophet says in Jeremiah, we heard a voice in Ramah. And God says to her, your actions have rewards. Your children will eventually return to their boundaries. That's what Rashi quotes. That's the Medrash. A fascinating tale. That Jacob is telling Joseph, I know that you have in your heart, but don't worry, God told me to bury her there, because when we'll lead the Jews to exile, led by Nebuchadnezzar's army, I want you to know Rachel wants to be there to cry out to God, and God tells her, don't worry, there's good reward for your action. A whole Megillah about why Jacob buried her on the side of the road instead of taking a simplistic approach that he simply couldn't make it to Hebron. And by the way, and what's the action? What action did Rachel do? Right? It says that she'll get rewarded for her action. God says, don't worry, Rachel. Don't cry for your children going into exile. Your actions will be rewarded. Which actions?